Welcome, everybody. I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. And here today to talk to IEEE leaders, IEEE members, section leaders about how you can interact with policymakers in your local community, whether they be federal, members of Senate, Congress people, or city council or state elected officials. IEEE-USA has encouraged and empowered local IEEE members to engage policymakers for a very long time, and many sections have done so very successfully. But COVID has now complicated our situation, and it has changed some of the rules on how to interact with policymakers in ways that we have to account for. But they've also given us some unique opportunities. And so what I want to talk to you about today is policy advocacy and in a COVID world, both the new challenges we face and the new opportunities that we have to work with policymakers. We'll get right in. Excuse me. COVID has clearly affected our democracy. It's affected how policymakers, elected officials, political candidates work with the general public and how the public works with them. Politics is fundamentally a people business. Politicians, their staff, generally like people. They like working with people. That's why they got into politics. They're usually good at working with people. And COVID makes that really hard all of a sudden. Technology has very clearly played a crucial role in making our current situation much better than it would be otherwise. You can imagine the situation without the internet would make everything we're now trying to do much more difficult. But technology can't completely bridge that gap. And technology creates some new challenges to us working with policymakers that we need to deal with. So the rules for politics are changing. We don't necessarily know what the new rules are or how the rules are changing. That's going to be kind of a long-term process, but we can get the sense of what's going on and we can start to adapt to them. So if you think of yourself as a politician, just go with me here for a minute. What do politicians do? Well, they kiss babies, they hold meetings, they shake hands, they knock on doors, they hold town hall sessions. They do their best, most of the politicians do their best to put themselves physically in front of regular voters to convince those voters to vote for them or to agree with whatever positions they're taking or just to learn what the voters want. But most of a politician's time is spent trying to engage as closely as possible with actual people, most of which is now very difficult. You can't kiss babies. No, kissing anybody is now off the table. You can't really hold big public meetings. You can sort of, but not really. You can kind of shake hands sometimes, but probably shouldn't. And you can try to knock on people's doors to talk to them, but they usually don't actually want to talk to you, which means it is much more difficult for policymakers to interact with the public in this interesting COVID world. On the other hand, COVID limitations affect everyone. It makes it harder for us to talk to them as well. But politicians have to talk to voters. And it's not just about getting elected. Politicians have to interact with people to know what it is that the public wants them to do and to find out the problems the public are having that they need politicians to solve. Democracies don't really work if there's not back and forth between politicians and the public. And part of that is getting elected, but it's much bigger than that. The thing about it is this: politicians don't actually have to talk to lobbyists. And one of the things we're seeing here in DC is that it is incredibly difficult for professionals like myself and the rest of the IEEE-USA staff to get face time with policymakers or staff. We can call them on the phone, but the regular interaction between lobbyists and policymakers is very strained. I think that's the best way to phrase it. And for those of you who are not lobbyists, that's a good thing, because it opens up the playing field for new voices, new people, new ideas to enter into the policymakers' world. Now, it is also true that politicians need to talk to their fundraisers, but we don't need to get into that. The field is not entirely clear for us, but it's much clearer than it has been in the past, which gives us an opportunity. So what is IEEE's political strength? Well, we don't bring money or influence to the table. IEEE-USA does not have a $10 million PAC. We don't have any PAC, as a matter of fact. So we don't spend any campaign money or provide any campaign money to politicians. And IEEE members aren't really a voting bloc. I can't go to a politician and say, I'm bringing 170,000 votes with me to the table, because it turns out IEEE members don't like doing what they're told. And if I were to tell IEEE members, you're all going to vote for candidate X, that would not go over well. And that's a good thing for IEEE and IEEE members, but it does limit our ability to operate in Washington. But that doesn't mean we can't operate in Washington. IEEE-USA, IEEE brings two things to the table when we interact with policymakers. We bring people, votes, but people, 170,000 people is a lot, politically speaking. 170,000 plus people is a lot, politically speaking. And we have IEEE members in every congressional district in the country, which very few groups can actually say. And that's a big deal politically. Moreover, IEEE members are not just people. They're not just regular voters. IEEE members know stuff. And you know stuff the policymakers need to know about autonomous vehicles, about cybersecurity, about cryptocurrency, about all the technology policy issues that Congress and the state legislators and your local government have to deal with. So you know things that they need to know. And here's the interesting thing. Most of them know it. Most of them know, they might not admit it, but they know they don't know enough about technology to set technology policy, but they have to anyway. And what this means is most policymakers are actually very interested in talking to you. Now, because of the noise in society, because of the chaos in our society, which is normal for a healthy democracy, it's hard for them to find you. But if we go to them, we can actually have some interesting discussions. America's society is increasingly loud and chaotic. And because of COVID, the opportunities to have interactions with policymakers are becoming rarer and more difficult. But the information you have is becoming more and more essential over time. So how can we use your value to your policymakers to create opportunities for you to interact with those policymakers for IEEE's interest, for your personal interest, and for the good of society? Well, there's a couple tools we have to work with. The most effective way for you to work with your local policymakers is through local meetings. You can come to Washington, well, not at the moment, but in normal times. But coming to Washington for meetings is kind of off the table at the moment. But you can still go to their local offices in your community, in your town, in the nearby city. And every elected official has an office somewhere that you can go to talk to them directly. Now, these meetings are relatively easy to set up. They are incredibly effective ways to deliver information and to build relationships. But COVID does make them quite tricky. At the moment, for example, normally we invite IEEE sections in particular to invite legislators to come to local IEEE section meetings. That is obviously difficult at the moment, and it is unlikely that any politician is going to do that. You might convince them to be on a Zoom meeting, but we'll talk about why those are tricky in a minute. So if you're going to meet face-to-face with a policymaker, it's going to be probably in their office. It's safer. They can control, the cleanliness of it. They can, make sure they sanitize things. So it's probably going to be there, but that's okay. That'll work. If you can find 2 to 5 IEEE members who are interested in talking to a policymaker about a particular thing, you can arrange these meetings. We generally don't want to go a lot above 5 because it gets intimidating. And in a COVID world, large meetings are more dangerous than small meetings. But a small meeting, a couple people focused on one issue, you can make this happen. Obviously, there's going to be discussion about both security and health concerns that have to be dealt with, but you can do it. How do you do it? Well, you want to contact the office you want to meet with 2 to 3 weeks in advance. Maybe a little earlier than that, but you don't want to go too far in advance because legislative offices just don't operate too far in advance. 2 to 3 weeks in advance, contact them, email, phone call, both work. You want to tell the staff who you are, name. Most important thing after your name is where you live. They want to determine right at the very beginning that you are in fact a voter for them. But also that you're with IEEE. You're with an organization with a national membership that has a lot of members in their town, their district, their state, depending on what they represent. So you want to tell them who you are, You want to tell them what you want to talk about, a specific issue, and then you want to give them a window of time when you're available. You don't want to say, hey, we're available next Tuesday at 11. They're very busy. They have very dense calendars. But if you say, hey, we're available 2 weeks from now, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday afternoon, okay, now you're in business. As always, when you make this request, you want to be flexible, polite, and persistent. You want to be flexible because the first offer of a meeting is a good chance it's not going to be accepted. But because policymakers are very busy, politicians have a lot going on, particularly at this moment in time with a national election coming up. So you got to be flexible. If they tell you, listen, we can't meet with you in the next 3 weeks. Our legislator is going to be in Washington. He's going to be in the Capitol. He's going to be out of town. He's just got too much on his plate. You come back with, what about next month? What about next month? What about the month that you start in a negotiation? And as long as you're willing to work with them, they're probably going to try to find a way to accommodate you. Always want to be polite. Interactions with voters that they don't know are dangerous in our modern society. And I don't mean just physically dangerous. I mean, they kind of are, but that's not the concern. They're politically dangerous. They don't know that this meeting you're trying to set up isn't a setup, that you're not trying to embarrass them and get some video for the other team. If you're professional, if you're polite, if you're accommodating, they're more likely to take a shot and trust you that this meeting is exactly what it is, which is an honest attempt for a dialogue between voters and politicians. Lastly, you want to be persistent. The first time you ask for a meeting, you'll probably be told no. The second time you ask for a meeting, you will be less likely to be told no. What we found is when you ask for a meeting, the staff and legislator are going to want to accommodate you. But maybe they're busy, they got other stuff going on, they don't know you. So they say, no, we're just busy. Okay, fine. You come back the next month and make the same request, they're going to feel an obligation to say yes. Still might not, but they're going to try to work with you. And if you come back the third time, always being polite, always being understanding, always being accommodating, eventually you'll wear them down and they will allow you to come in and meet with them. We've had some phenomenal success with some great legislative meetings at the section level, organized by section members that simply didn't take no for an answer. They were always polite about it, but okay, you can't meet in April. Come back in May. Can you meet us in May? Nope, can't meet in May. What about June? And you just keep coming back every couple weeks, every month or so, saying, hey, listen, we're still here and we still want to talk to you. Eventually, it always works. So we have local meetings, very powerful, very effective, very complicated in a COVID world. So if we're not going to do this, the next best option is a conference call. Not a video call, we'll get to them in a second, but a conference call. These are easy, they're cheap, they're safe, they're convenient, but they're not particularly personal. And of course, politics is always about the personal, but they're still effective if this is what you can do. And of course, there's no safety concerns, sort of, with a phone call. We'll get back to that in a minute. Conference call, up to 10 IEEE members, a little bit more, but once you approach 10, 12 people, most of the people on the call are not going to be able to talk, other than maybe to say hi, because there's just not enough time and it gets chaotic. But if that's okay, adding extra people is fine. If you're setting up a conference call, you're going to need to script it. And I want to be very clear what I mean by that. You do not want to write out what everybody's going to say. That doesn't work. It makes you sound robotic and artificial. But you do want to make sure everybody understands that Dave is going to start the meeting. He's going to say hi, he's going to introduce the group, and he's going to go around and tell whoever you have on the call who else is there. This is this person, this person, this person. Then when they're done introducing everyone, Susan is going to take over and she's going to make point number one. And she's going to talk about these things. You're not going to tell Susan what to say specifically, but everybody's going to know what Susan's going to cover. Then Ed's going to take over and talk about number two, and then Diane is going to take over to bring things to a close. You need to basically have an agenda and have everybody understand everybody's roles so you don't talk over each other, because since you can't see each other, you can't give each other nonverbal cues that you would use in the meeting. But as long as you have that basically laid out, these are pretty straightforward. If you set up a conference call with a legislator, it almost certainly will be with staff, at least for the first one. They need to get to know you, make sure they can trust you. But that's fine. Meetings, conversations with staff are enormously effective. can get great stuff done in terms of influencing the legislator, and is a necessary step in building trust among the legislative staff. So staff meetings are fantastic. The way you set these up is basically the same. Contact 2 or 3 weeks in advance. You can do a little shorter time for a phone call because they're easier. You want to go, again, introduce yourself, have some proposed times, and have the call-in information ready when you make that first call. You want to know how you're going to do this call. If you don't have a conference call system, come to IEEE-USA. We do. We can let you use it. We can help you set it up. Be aware, however, that the staff may wish to use their own system, which is fine. They're more comfortable with it. They understand how it works. There are some complicated legal issues that sometimes get involved that you guys don't want to worry about, that they have to be aware of. So sometimes it's just easier for them to use their system, which is fine, but you want to come to them with a system in place if they want to use it. It makes it look like you've given this some thought and you have your act together. So it's just a good idea. So those are phone calls. Good, cheap, easy, not quite as personal as an in-person visit. Which then brings us to video calls, which sound like they would reside nicely between a phone call and a personal meeting, because they are more personal than a conference call. They are cheap, they're convenient, everybody's kind of comfortable with them now. A lot of staff don't like them, and they have a good reason not to like them, which we'll talk about in a second. But if staff will agree to a conference call, a video call, that's what you should do. Zoom, WebEx, or whatever. That's what you should use. Again, IEEE-USA has services available that we can let you use. Check on Zoom. Some policymakers don't like it because of security concerns. If they say, no, we won't do Zoom, we got WebEx, Google Meets works. Whatever system you want to use is fine, as long as the legislative staff know about it and know about it in advance. Again, they may want to use their system. Pardon me, their system, which is fine too. So here's the problem with video calls. Staff, a lot of legislative staff are still working out of their homes, out of their apartments. A lot of these apartments don't have good Wi-Fi, don't have good internet, and don't have broadband. So a lot of the staff don't really have tech that allow them to do these things. There's a bigger problem, though. Legislative staff, politicians in general, are on the minute they step out of their door. They have to be professional. They have to watch what they say, watch what they do. And interactions with the public can at times be quite hostile. What we've heard after talking to a good number of staff is that staff are very uncomfortable welcoming the public into their private homes, which is what you do in a video conference. That is especially true if they have a family. And so staff are willing to do conference calls from home, but they really don't want the cameras on in their personal housing, their apartments, their houses, their personal space. And I got to say, I really understand that. I get where they're coming from and respect that need for some privacy. So even if you can do a conference call, there's a good chance the staff isn't going to want to, and will suggest a phone call instead. If they do that, know there's a good reason for it, and accept the phone call. But if they're willing to do it, go ahead and do it. Setting up is fairly easy, again, 2-3 weeks in advance. The trick to a conference call is you have to make sure everybody has the call-in information early, and frankly, then again, late. You want to send it out as soon as the call is set up, and then send it out again the day before the call happens. And you got to have a backup plan. Learning from experience, I can tell you that you need to have a call-in number for the video call as well, just in case video doesn't work, which it does on occasion. So you want to have that backup plan in place and distributed prior to the call, just in case. But if you can pull off a video call, they're great. Here is the cardinal sin. The only way you can really mess up one of these meetings in a major way: never, ever, ever record the meeting. Make sure all of your participants know you're not going to record it. Make sure the staff know you're not going to record it. And then most of certainly don't record it. The reason is not that staff and legislators don't want the public to see what they're doing. They generally do. What they don't want, however, is to take a perfectly friendly and professional conversation with voters, have it recorded, and then pulled apart by the other team, reassembled, perhaps having things added in to change what was a perfectly professional and reasonable meeting, and turn it into a major scandal and embarrassment. And so staff and legislators have a very real and very sincerely held concern that these dialogues will be recorded and then twisted in a way that will make them look bad. We obviously will not do that. IEEE-USA members will, even if we were to record them, which we won't, we would not release it to the public, and we certainly wouldn't edit them in any way. But again, part of the process here is about building trust. And so they don't trust you because they don't know you, and that's normal. Until they do trust you, don't challenge that trust by recording a meeting. Even if you don't do anything with it, they will have a very hard time trusting you ever if you do. So don't ever record any of these. One last way to interact with politicians, which is a little less fun but very powerful, which are section letters. These are formal letters from an IEEE section to their elected leaders expressing an opinion. These take a little more work. They're a little more time. You got to draft them very carefully. They are much less personal, but you don't have to ask the legislator for permission to do it. You don't have to coordinate schedules or anything, and they can be very effective. IEEE-USA has done a number of these letters, all of which are online if you'd like to see them, over the last couple weeks on a number of legislative issues. There's a small piece of one from the Tulsa section that you can see to Senator Inhofe. A couple rules on these letters. First of all, make it very clear that you can do this. The law allows IEEE members to interact with politicians pretty much any way you want. IEEE-USA, IEEE as an organization has some constraints, but you as an individual are free to do whatever you want, more or less. If you're going to use IEEE logos or IEEE resources, we can't comment on elections, but in terms of having dialogues, no problem at all. And these section letters, there's no legal reason we can't do them. There are some internal reasons, there are internal restrictions on the use of them. First of all, if you're going to send us a letter to a legislator saying it's from the section or from a technical society or any other piece of IEEE, the head of that unit has to approve the letter. So if you're sending a letter from a section, which is the most effective way to do it, the section chair has to sign off on it. And if it's under their signature, in other words, if the section chair signs it, which again is ideal, the section chair has to be okay with all the text in it. Secondly, the letters have to be consistent with IEEE approved policies. In other words, you as a section can't say things that contradict what the organization has said. If you're having a private meeting or a conference call with a legislator, IEEE members can say anything they want because those are individual IEEE members doing the speaking. But a letter from a section is a formal document from the organization, not just the members who are on it, and so it has to be consistent with IEEE policy. IEEE-USA has a fairly sizable library of positions on most of the issues that IEEE members care about. Those are sufficient to give you permission. If you have any questions about this, send me an email, give me a call, we'll talk about it. When you draft these letters, we want them to go to the local office of the politician. You can send them to Washington, but we actually think they're more effective if they go to the local office. That doesn't happen as much, so it catches them by surprise, which makes them pay more attention to it. Best way to deliver a letter is by hand. It's personal. You establish that personal connection. But of course, delivering it by hand can be tricky. COVID makes it difficult. Security arrangements make it difficult. So if you can't deliver it by hand or just don't want to for whatever reason, deliver it by fax. Offices still have fax numbers. You can fax it to any office you want. Note that I'm not saying send it through the mail. You don't want to do that. Several years ago, somebody sent anthrax through the mail and it killed a bunch of people in Washington. Just a couple weeks ago, somebody sent ricin through the mail and nobody was killed, fortunately, but it does make people a little bit edgy. Moreover, mail sent to policymakers, through the post office can take 6 weeks to arrive. And so it just really isn't an effective way to deliver a letter anymore. But hand works, fax works. If you have had previous interactions with a staff member, you can send it by email. The trick there is staff members are very concerned about viruses, and so they are unlikely to click on an attachment from somebody they don't know. But if you do know them, Send it to them, tell them, remind them who you are, tell them what the attachment is, and there's a good chance they'll open it. I would still fax it though. A couple rules on letters: 1 page. That includes the heading, that includes the conclusion, that includes the signature. Okay, you can go on to 2 pages if you absolutely have to, but that's it. This is not a dissertation on why a policy option is wise. It is a straightforward statement of, it's a request really, that policymakers do something, and the details are less important. So 1, 2 pages if you absolutely must is all you got. 1 issue per letter. If your local section has 3 things you want to talk about, send 3 letters. That's fine, but you can't all put it in 1 letter. For one thing, you only have 2 pages. This is very true of letters, but it's true of actually of almost all communications with policymakers. Make your point, make it quickly, and then leave. Always being polite while you do it. Letter is 2 pages. Meetings of any sort, on the phone, video conference, or in person, 15 minutes, 20 minutes at the most. Since you're doing it at the local level, you might get 30 minutes with a staffer, but that's about it. And so you have to get to your point quickly, be fairly blunt, and then move on. All right, so that's how to set up the meetings. A couple other basic rules on how to play in this game. And before I say them, I want to emphasize, this is not difficult. And so you can do this even if you didn't know the rules. For one thing, you probably wouldn't break them anyway. Secondly, even if you get things a little bit wrong, these communications can be highly effective. So don't obsess about the rules. I'm giving them to you just to help you do a better job. But this is more about putting in the effort than doing it right, because if you put in the effort, you almost certainly will do it right. Basic rules: all interactions, well, with everybody, but certainly with policymakers and politicians, be polite and professional to everybody. That is part of your strength as an advocate. You are not just a regular person. You are an engineer. You are a programmer. You're a technical person. If you behave like a professional, they will assume you are professionally competent, which you are, and they will listen to you. And of course, be polite to everyone always, and respectful of everyone always. Even if the staffer you're talking to looks a lot like your granddaughter, treat them as though they were the legislator. These interactions are as much about building trust with the legislative office than they are about getting a particular outcome. In other words, if you're contacting a legislator because you want them to vote a particular way on a piece of legislation, which you should do, your interaction isn't just about getting them to vote yes on the bill. It's also about building a relationship with them so that they know who you are. They know you understand this technical stuff. So if they need information, they'll come to you. And so they'll listen to you more the next time. And so keep that in mind, that this is not an event, it's a process. And the first time you go to your legislative office, it starts the process rolling, but there should be subsequent conversations, meetings, interactions down the line to build on the level of trust that you want to develop. Everything you do with politicians should be short and sweet. Who are you? Where do you live? What do you want? Thanks for your time. These are not long dialogues or, conversations. They're relatively short interactions that build up over time. This is a hard one, and it's hard for everybody, but it's especially hard, I think, for people that have a lot of information they want to convey to a politician. Make sure all of your interactions are dialogues, not lectures. It is very important to make space in your meeting to let the staffer talk, to let the legislator talk, to let them ask you questions, to let them express their opinions. This is hard to do, particularly when you're nervous, which most people are in these sort of situations. But if you're nervous, you're focusing on what you want to say and what you have to get out and what you want them to understand. And you can forget that you're also there to hear where they are, how they perceive these issues, and to hear what they need from you. Please explain to me. You're talking about the need to fund quantum computing research. That's great, but I don't know what a quantum computer is. Can you explain that to me? You kind of want to know that. If the politician doesn't know what a quantum computer is, and you want them to fund this research, you kind of want to find that out and have an opportunity to explain it to them. So make sure, and again, this is harder than it sounds, make sure you are cognizant of the need to listen as well as speak in these meetings. Lastly, always have an ask. Interactions with politicians and policymakers or business meetings, not get to know you sessions, although that's part of what you're doing. But whenever you go to them, you should want something from them. Now, sometimes it's just we want a speaker for our meeting. We want to hear from you. We want to meet you. We want to get to know you. So come to our meeting. But that's not the kind of meetings we're doing right now. If you're going to them, they're going to expect you to want something. And that's okay. I mean, that is their job after all. So always have an ask and always ask it. And never record the meeting. Very important. To emphasize something I said a minute ago, this is not actually hard. I think people in Washington that do this for a living, like me, oftentimes try to make this process a lot harder than it actually is. And a lot of them do it because they're trying to justify their jobs. I've worked with IEEE-USA for 18 years. I don't feel the need to justify my job in that way. So I will tell you the secret about all this. It's not that difficult. You don't really need any specialized knowledge to work with policymakers. There are no secret code words. You don't have to get on any particular list to do this. The trick to interacting with a legislator is to interact with a legislator. In other words, the act of doing it for the first time is the hardest part. And once you do that, do it a second time, do it a third time, you've done the hard part. And everything else will follow from that. The reality is the legislators want to hear from you. They want to hear from everybody because that's how they get votes. But they want to hear from you in particular because you have information that they need. As someone who is technical, who has an understanding and knowledge about technical things, policymakers have to vote on technical laws and technical policies, which they don't have the background to really understand correctly. Which means they want to hear from you because you're a voter. They want to hear from you because you have information. And because they want your vote, they want that interaction to be positive. What that means is, if you go to a policymaker, hey, the Des Moines section would like to have a call with you and or your staff to talk about solar power policy or whatever it is you want to talk to them about, they are going to want that interaction to be positive. So if you go to them and get it a little wrong, oh, you forget the date, oh, you've forgotten the names of all your participants, oh, you're so nervous you forget something, don't worry about it. They've dealt with worse. They've dealt successfully with worse, and they will work with you to make the interaction a positive one. It is the staff's job, and in fact, the politician's job, to meet with people. That's how they keep their jobs. As a matter of fact, you're giving them an opportunity to reach people who are otherwise hard to reach, and they will appreciate you doing it. Lastly, always remember that IEEE-USA is here to help. We are your staff. We are eyes, ears, and voice here in Washington. We can help you through this if you feel you need the help. If you don't want our help, do it anyway. Please tell us what you're doing just so we know. But we are fully convinced that you are capable of establishing these relationships on your own, and we encourage you to do so. I'm Russ Harrison. I'm proudly the Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. My phone number on your screen, 202-530-8326. My email address is r.t.harrison@ieee.org. Please reach out if you have any questions, you have interesting ideas, you have an innovative thought on how you can work with your local elected officials. I'd love to hear it, and I'd love to work with you. The rest of my staff is here to help you, so please take advantage of us. Again, I'm Russ Harrison with IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to working with you down the line. Have a good day.